Have you ever been out in your garden and you notice that one bee is buzzing around some flowers? And then all of a sudden, there are a lot of bees buzzing around the flowers getting the pollen. How did that happen? Did one bee go and tell its friends where to find the pollen on the flowers? And then they go and get that pollen as well to bring it back? Well, maybe they did actually. And believe it or not, the way they communicate with each other is through dance. Bees actually do a dance. And in this video, I'm going to tell you about that process as well as talk about other animal and plant responses to the environment and to each other. Let's get started. So in this video, we want to talk about all the ways that different organisms respond to the environment. Now, when you think environment, don't just think the physical environment like the temperature and the plants. Environment includes everything in our environment, including the other animals. So what I've done is I've broken this into two categories. So in this video, we're going to look at plant response and animals response. So the three types of plant response I want to focus on are plant ripening, herbivory defense, how plants defend against invaders, phototropism and photoperiodism, how plants respond to light, and then in the animal section, I want to talk about four different kinds of response. How animals respond in their movement, how animals communicate, like the bees, how animals are social, and then this idea of kinship selection and the idea of animals taking care of other animals. So these are the main topics we're going to look at in this video. Let's get started in the plant area with fruit ripening. So you may remember we talked about many chapters ago this idea of the signal transduction pathway. That is how we have a reception, a transduction, and then a response. Okay, so think back. You may remember everything's cellular. So we have some sort of signal. Maybe it's a ligand or a ligand. That binds to a receptor protein. That is called the reception. The cell signal is detected by a receptor. Then there is a way of changing that signal or transducing that signal to amplify it so that we eventually get some response. So we talked about this generically, and we also gave a few examples in previous videos. But what I want you to remember for this video is that these pathways are not just in animals. We actually see signal reception, transduction in plants as well. So plants use these chemical receptors and responses just like animals do. It's not exactly the same mechanism, but you'll see some similarities. So let's look at one to begin with. Fruit ripening. Have you ever wondered about the ripening process? Well, so what do I mean when I say ripen? Well, okay, so you've got a tomato, it's green, it's not going to be very good. We don't really want to get that tomato. But if you leave it on the vine long enough, right, it will ripen into that luscious red tomato. Well, what's really going on there? What is the process occurring? Even if you look here, I've got some little cherry tomatoes. You can see these are the ones I want to eat. These are more ripe. So when something's ripe, that means it's sweeter tasting, it's softer, it tastes better for us. Well, believe it or not, plants have evolved a ripening process. And this is part of what we call a positive feedback system. So the ripening occurs by a hormone called ethylene. This is a hormone. And when the fruit, in this case the tomato, is ready to ripen, what happens is ethylene, the hormone, is released and it starts to ripen the fruit to here. So what's really going on? And this is a positive feedback loop because once ethylene starts the ripening, that is positive. So a little ethylene produced, which produces more ethylene, which more ripen, which means more ethylene. So this is positive. So this leads to more of this, which leads to more of this. What is this ripening really doing? Well, if you think about it, the seeds, right, the genetic material they need to develop in the fruit. but they're not quite ready, right? When the fruit isn't ripened and ready to go. So we need, or the plant evolved, for the ripening process to be a signal, oh, this is a good fruit to eat. And so what happens is, as the fruit ripens, it becomes more enjoyable to eat. And that's so that, if you think about it, we don't want an animal to eat this when it's not ripe because the seed's not developed. So what will happen is ethylene will trigger this ripening process and the cell walls will start to break down so that it becomes softer. And also a lot of the starch that's in here, these sort of heavy starches, will be converted into more simple sugars. That makes it sweeter and more enjoyable for an animal to eat. So the animal eats it and then spreads the seed. We want it to eat the ripe one because that means the seeds are developed. We don't want an animal eating these. So plants evolved for this fruit ripening to occur to make the fruit more enjoyable. So you can think of the same thing happening with your bananas, right? The ethylene is released, which says ripen the bananas. And of course, they'll start to break down, become more sugary, more delicious as they break down, and also a lot more soft. That's so that an animal will eat it and spread the seeds, which are now ready. Okay, so if this is one type of response. The plant is responding to a hormone, ethylene. Another really interesting defense mechanism of plants is what we call herbivory defense. You don't think of plants being able to fight off, right, and defend themselves. Maybe they've got some thorns, but actually some plants have evolved the ability to defend themselves against caterpillars. So you think a caterpillar, right, comes and starting to eat the plant. Well, the plant doesn't want you to eat all the leaves. It needs those for photosynthesis. So what happens is the plant will release these volatile attractants. What are they attracting? They're actually attracting these parasitoid wasps. So these wasps come and they find the caterpillar and they actually lay their eggs. They inject, they deposit their eggs within the caterpillar. So the leaf is defending itself. It's saying, I don't want this caterpillar eating me. So it releases an attractant. The wasp, it comes, it lays its eggs in the caterpillar, and the wasp eggs grow in the caterpillar. So these wasps actually develop. And here's a picture, get ready for it. This is a picture of a caterpillar that is full of these wasp eggs. And eventually, these, of course, are going to develop. They'll be born, they'll break out, and finish killing the caterpillar as they leave. So even plants have a mechanism of responding to their environment and responding to these herbivores like a caterpillar when they don't want to be eaten. Another interesting thing that plants do, this would be our third example, is phototropism and photoperiodism. So you think about this, break down the word photo, light. Tropism is a movement, light. Periodism, think of a time. So this is movement of a plant based on light, and this is a time period or maybe a blooming of a flower based on the amount of light. So we'll start with phototropism. Phototropism, a response to the presence of light, like I mentioned. And here's a prime example. So maybe you notice some flowers. If you have a potted plant inside and you leave it by a window, what's going to happen? Well, you'll notice that it looks like the plant is trying to reach the window or reach the sun. Yes, plants do move and grow towards the light. Well, how does this happen? Well, it's actually a chemical, and it's kind of small there, so I'll rewrite it, called auxin. Auxin is a chemical that it moves and tells the stem of a plant to elongate on one side. So what happens is, if we find out the sun, it senses this, by the way, at the very top. It will sense where the sun is. And then the plant will release a signal to tell the auxin hormone to come to the opposite side. So if the light's over here, we really want the stem to grow on the opposite side. So if you think about it, if all of these cells started growing to get bigger, they expand this side, which means these cells are bigger. The plant is leaning in one direction this way. And that's all hormonal. It's plants using this auxin hormone to elongate the stem cells in one direction so that the other direction is actually facing more towards the sun. That's called phototropism, the plant moving towards the light. The other example is photoperiodism, and this is a change or response to the change in the length of the night. We actually call these long day and short day plants. So here's an example of a long day plant. If you think of some flowers, right, like this carnation here, we call this a long day plant because it will flower, meaning put out its flower, when there is a long day or short night. So this would be like early spring, right? It still needs to be warm enough for the plant to bloom, right? So we're not talking winter here necessarily. But like if you think early spring, when you start to see some flowers pop up, that's because in early spring, the nights are getting shorter now and the days are getting longer. So these plants bloom or flower when the day reaches a critical period. It's actually more about the night, when the night is actually short. Well, what's the other alternative? That would be a short day plant or a long night. So if you think about when there is a long night, like late in the summer, right, where we're starting to, we've passed the summer solstice and the nights are starting to get a little longer, days are starting to get shorter, we'll see things start to plant. Cotton is a prime example. So if you look, if you're a farmer or if you're just driving down and you see different crops, you'll notice some crops bloom later or flower later in the summer, some flower earlier in the summer. That might be because of the long day, short day plant photoperiodism. Okay, so plants respond to light. That's our third example. Okay, what about animals? So now let's make the move over to animals. One thing that animals do is they will move in response to a stimulus. Now that stimulus could be several different things. It might be light, it might be a food source, etc. We call this taxis and kinesis. Think kinetic, like moving. So here I've got a typical sort of lab experiment. I've got two mice, and they can choose. This is like a choice chamber. They can choose to go over here to this side or this side. Maybe this side's got some food in it. Maybe this side's got some light in it. Whatever the source or the stimulus might cause, you could do an experiment where you put some mice in here and see what they chose. Let's see what these mice choose. Oh, they're going to come over here, it looks like, to the side with the light. So we call this kinesis or taxis because they have responded to a stimulus. We could change out the stimulus, put a different food source, see what they respond to. One that we do often in the biology laboratory is this right here. We got a typical choice chamber, and we like to use millipedes. I like to do this lab a lot, where you take a nice millipede and you put some here in the center. All right, so we put them in here, and then maybe we've got some, let's say, glucose over here, and maybe we've got some sucrose over here, and we want to know which sugar do they prefer? Do they like the glucose or the sucrose better? And then there's these little barriers that you can separate, so you can pull up this barrier on either side, and then they have a choice. Do they want to go over here to the glucose? They want to go to the sucrose? You don't know. Looks like in this case they wanted to go over to the sucrose. That is because they may find one attractant or something more attractant than others. So a chemoattractant is just some chemical that's attracting something. So maybe it's a paramecium, maybe it's some single-celled organism, or maybe it's something a little more complex like a millipede. They might move towards the chemical attractant. We also could change this experiment. Instead of sucrose and glucose, we could put something that it maybe wanted to avoid, like some poison, right? We would generally not do this in the laboratory. We don't want to harm animals. But if there's a chemorepellent, it would go away from there. So the response to the stimulus, we would call a taxis or kinesis. Animals also communicate. This is a way of responding in our environment or responding to each other. So we have visual communication, audible, touch, tactile, and even electrical or chemical signals. The bee dance takes us back to the very beginning when I mentioned how bees actually communicate about food sources or maybe a patch of flowers. So what happens is, let's say we've got a worker bee, it goes out, finds a good patch of flowers, lots of pollen available. It will come back and do this elaborate dance. And scientists have studied this quite a bit. Then the other bees are looking, paying attention. They're looking at the way or the waggle of this particular bee, and that tells it, believe it or not, an angle by which to leave from the hive and go find this food source. And it's all about the dance. It all comes down to dance in the case of these bees. Not all, but a lot of it comes down to the dance in the case of these bees. So that is one way that bees visually communicate with each other through the dance. Birds, you know how they communicate a lot, right? Through their song. We listen to different bird songs. They're all unique. And this is all about identification and mating, right? I want to identify where the other birds are that are my species, and maybe we want to mate. So birds communicate via song. That would be an audible communication. There's also chemical communication when you think about territorial markings. So we've got a nice ring-tailed lemur here. Notice that it's holding up its tail because it's probably leaving some scent behind. It's leaving a chemical, right? Maybe a particular pheromone, which is a scent that they leave behind, either to mark its territory or maybe to attract a mate or maybe both. So another way of communication is chemical communication. And then another interesting one, which involves a lot of these, right, is pack behavior. So here we have some African wild dogs. Don't those look crazy? And their communication about pack hunting. They've got to be able to communicate with each other really well in their hunting so that they can properly get their prey. Okay, so there's lots of ways that animals communicate and respond through all of these methods here. Animals are also very social, or many animals, I should say, are very social. And so there are some interesting social behaviors or responses that we notice as well. One interesting one I find is this dominance hierarchy. So if you think about the pecking order, right? Social ranking within a group. And here in this example, you can see that some wolves, they've eaten something here. I can't tell what that was. But this one right here, I would probably imagine is the alpha because it is in control and it looks like it's probably telling some of the other wolves in the pack, I'm going first. I'm the alpha. My social rank is higher than yours. Back off while I have my turn first and then you'll get yours. So this dominance hierarchy is one really interesting social behavior that we see in some animals. The wedge-capped capuchins really, if you study those, you find that they have a clear dominance hierarchy within their group, within their family as well. You can kind of see it here, this picture. It's pretty clear who's in control here, right? This monkey's kind of laying out to the other one what's going on. Looks like it's even got a tool in its hand. So dominance within a tribe or within a pack is actually one social behavior that we see within several groups. Agonistic behavior, this is funny too. You might see some animals, maybe you have some dogs and it looks like they're always fighting. Are they really fighting? Or are they just doing these agonistic behaviors, these symbolic rituals to sort of practice fighting? So you think about these kangaroo boxing. You've maybe seen these a lot on YouTube or different little videos going around. And are the kangaroos in this little boxing, are they really trying to hurt each other? More than likely not. Probably what they're doing is they're fighting, they're doing these rituals to either establish the dominance hierarchy or to just practice when they might actually have to go to battle. So really no harm done, no foul. Now they could get hurt, but the intent of these behaviors is really not about hurting each other. It's really more about establishing dominance or practicing the behaviors that they might need. I was lucky enough to actually get to feed some kangaroos, and lucky for me, they didn't try to box me, because they probably would have won. When I'm on vacation, I'm not in really the mood to box. This is a cute little one that came up and wanted to eat some food I had for it. So dominance hierarchy, agonistic behavior, and then another one, probably one of the more common that we see in more evolved species, is this idea of cooperative behavior. This is when there is an increase in the fitness of an individual because of the increase in the fitness of the population. When the population does better, the individuals which make up the population do better as well. And a really fun example of this is how you see dolphins feed. And so you can see here, we've got one dolphin, this is the driver, that it's got a school of fish, and it sort of is herding the fish towards this barrier that the others have communicated and set up in advance. So the fish, they're being herded this way by the driver. They see these dolphins, so what they generally do is they leap up into the air. Well, the dolphins know this, and as they leap into the air, the driver and the barrier dolphins catch the fish up in their mouth and seize all of that bounty in the air. So this is a way of cooperative behavior. More evolved species, you'll see this a lot. Cooperation in the group, in the population, is very important for survival. And then finally, to wrap this up with different animal responses, I want to talk about an interesting phenomenon called kinship selection. Kin is sort of maybe an older word. You don't hear it as much as you used to. When you talk about your kin, you're really talking about your relatives, right? And what is a relative? Well, that's someone who shares some of your DNA. So the DNA of your relatives is close to you. So what we found over time by watching some animals, particularly this one here, the Belding ground squirrel, is that they display altruistic behavior. And if you think of altruism, a lot of people say another word for that is maybe selfless. So they sacrifice themselves, or they do selfless things, and that may reduce their individual fitness, but it increases the fitness of their community, of the other Belding ground squirrels. So in this case, what happens with the Belding ground squirrel is, if a Belding ground squirrel is out and it sees, let's say, a big bird up here flying towards it, right? It will actually scream out or screech and alert the other squirrels that there is a predator coming. Now, this does two things. One, it alerts the family or the tribe to go hide. But conversely, secondly, it actually tells the bird or the predator where this squirrel is. So in a way, it's sort of sacrificing itself for the good of its kin, or the good of its family, or the good of its society. And so what I have here is I have a little video of this in action. You can sort of see how the Belding ground squirrels work. So I'm going to let that sort of play while I talk about it. They're really cute little creatures. They come out, and you can see they're sort of scurrying around. But when they sense something, right, they'll sort of stand up really tall. Maybe they sense something, they're looking. They want to see if there's predator coming. They want to protect the tribe, right? They're checking. And in the case that there was a predator, right, they want to alert the people back that are eating and may not know about the predator. So if they sort of scream out, that gives the alert for the others to run back into the ground and hide. So this kinship selection, this idea of sacrificing for your kin because they share your DNA, is really a way of ensuring that that DNA does go into the next generation. Because by protecting my relatives, my cousins, my kin, in a way, I'm ensuring that my own DNA also gets into the next generation. So, hopefully in this video, you learned a few ways that both plants and animals respond to their environment. If you enjoyed this video, like and subscribe to the page.